Hello, hello everyone. This is going to be a continuation of our lecture on economics and urbanization that we started on Tuesday. Um, yeah, this is just to wrap up the second half of that. So we'll start at cities are places of crises and opportunities. So more than half of humans now live in cities, and in the next quarter century, that proportion will approach three-quarters of all humans. This is a dramatic change from our previous history, in which most people lived by hunting and gathering, farming, or fishing. Since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution about 300 years ago, cities have grown rapidly in both size and figure and power. So as you can see in this figure, human populations began to increase rapidly after about 1600 AD. Many factors contributed to this rapid growth. Increased sailing and navigating skills stimulated commerce and communication among nations. Agricultural developments, better sources of power, and improved healthcare and hygiene also played a role. We are now in an exponential or J-curve pattern of growth described in our previous lectures. It took all of human history to reach 1 billion people in 1800, but only 156 more years to get to 3 billion in 1960. It took us about 12 years to add the 7th billion. Another way to look at population growth is that the number of living people tripled during the 20th century. Will it do so again in the 21st century? If it does, will we overshoot our environment's carrying capacity and experience a catastrophic dieback similar to those described in previous lectures? As you will see in later through our discussions and lectures, there is some evidence that population growth already is slowing. But whether we will reach equilibrium soon enough and at a size that can be sustained over long term remains a difficult but vital question. So in less than 20 years, Shanghai, China has built Pudong, a new city of 1.5 million residents and 500 skyscrapers on former marshy farmland across Huangpu River. From historic city center, this kind of rapid urban growth is occurring in many developing countries. So now we can look at one of the most important demographic shifts of our time, urbanization. So this table shows that the urban share of total population from 1950 to 2030, broken down by region. In 1950, only about 38% of the world's population lived in cities. By 2030, that number is projected to rise to over 70%. That means the global urban population will have nearly doubled in just 80 years. So what's driving this shift? Economic opportunities, better infrastructure, education and healthcare access, but it also brings new challenges such as a strain on housing, sanitation, and transportation, increased energy and water demand, greater environmental impact, especially in developing regions. And you'll notice some regions like Europe and North America were already highly urbanized in 2000, but the biggest changes are happening in Africa and Asia where urban populations are rapidly growing. So what does this mean for sustainability? Urbanization affects everything we discussed, from resource use to ecosystem services to economic development and equity. Whether we manage this growth sustainably will determine much of our global future economically, environmentally, and socially. So the vast majority of urban growth will occur in less developed countries. Populations in these cities are expanding far faster than infrastructure such as roads, transportation, housing, water supplies, uh, sewage treatment, and schools can adapt. Building new infrastructure is especially hard in poor countries where incomes are low and tax collection is insufficient to support public services. Despite these challenges, cities are also places where innovation occurs. Ideas mix and experimentations happen in urban areas. In cities, there arise diverse employment opportunities and new economies, as well as concentrations of poverty. We really live in two very different demographic worlds. One of these worlds is poor, young, and growing rapidly, while the other is rich, old, and shrinking in population size. The poorer world is occupied by a vast majority of people who live in the less developed countries of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. These countries represent 80% of the world's population, but will contribute more than 90% of all projected future growth. The richer world is made up of North America, Western Europe, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. Huge urban agglomerations or merging of multiple municipalities are forming throughout the world. Some have become megacities with populations over 10 million people. Though these cities pave over vast landscapes and consume large amounts of resources, their per capita resource use is relatively efficient. Environmental degradation would probably be much worse if that many people were spread across the countryside. Cities, for all their ills, are one of the places where we can learn new ways to live sustainably. New York City is one of the largest cities in the world and has established new codes for green building, water conservation, and recycling. More New Yorkers use public transportation and walk to get around than any other major American city. So you can already see the dramatic shift in size and location of big cities. In 1900, only 13 cities in the world had populations over 1 million. All of those cities except Tokyo and Peking and Beijing were in Europe or North America. By 2012, there were at least 400 cities, 100 of them in China alone, with more than, I don't know, 100 of them in China alone. So there were more than a million residents in those areas in those 100 cities. Um, of the 13 largest of these metropolitan areas, none are in Europe. Only New York City and Los Angeles are in a developed country. It's expected that by 2025, at least 93 cities will have populations over 5 million, and three-fourths of those cities will be in developing countries. So this map shows the location of the largest urban centers around the world, both in the past and projected into the future. The red circles represent the population sizes of these cities, comparing 1984 to the projections for 2025. And you'll notice two things right away. First, the number of cities with over 5 million or even 35 million people are growing fast. And then second, most of these super cities are located in developing countries, particularly across Asia, Latin America, and parts of Africa. So by 2025, we can expect 400 cities with populations of over 1 million people and 93 super cities with populations of over 5 million people. That kind of growth brings major challenges, as the text below the map highlights. Three-fourths of the world's largest cities will be in countries that already struggle to provide housing, food, clean water, and employment to growing populations. So what does this mean for sustainability? It means urban planning, infrastructure, and economic development must all adapt quickly. If we don't prepare, rapid urbanization can worsen issues like pollution, inequality, congestion, and environmental degradation. But if managed well, cities can also be hubs of innovation and efficiency, offering the opportunity to build greener, smarter, more inclusive communities. So people migrate to cities for many reasons. In China over the past 20 years, or in America during the 20th century, mechanization eliminated jobs and drove people off the land. The cropland is owned by a minority of wealthy landlords, as is the case in many developing countries. Subsistence farmers are often ejected when new cash crop or cattle grazing become economically viable. Many people also move to the city for the opportunity and independence offered there. Cities offer jobs, better housing, entertainment, and freedom from the constraints of village traditions. Possibilities exist in the city for upward social mobility, prestige, and power, not ordinarily available in the country. Cities support specialization in arts, crafts, and professions for which markets don't exist elsewhere. Government policies often favor urban over rural areas in ways that both push and pull people into cities. Pollution from burgeoning traffic and from unregulated factories degrades air quality in many urban areas. China's spectacular economic growth has resulted in a flood of private automobiles, mainly in cities. In Beijing, for instance, the number of cars on the street has more than doubled in the past 5 years to 5 million. China is now the world's largest producer of greenhouse gases, and the World Bank warns that it is home to 16 of the world's 20 cities with the worst air pollution. Chinese health authorities say that a third of the country's urban residents are exposed to harmful air pollution levels. They blame this pollution for more than 400,000 premature deaths each year. Few cities in developing countries can afford to build modern waste treatment systems for their rapidly growing populations. The World Bank estimates that only one-third of urban residents in developing countries have satisfactory sanitation services. It's often difficult to find clean drinking water in urban areas. Worldwide, according to the United Nations, at least 1 billion people do not have safe drinking water, and twice that many do not have adequate sanitation. So the United Nations estimates that at least 1 billion people live in crowded, unsanitary slums of the central cities or in vast shanty towns and squatter settlements that ring the outskirts of most major cities in the developing world. Around 100 million people have no home at all. In Mumbai, formerly Bombay, India, for example, it's estimated that 500,000 people sleep on the streets, sidewalks, and traffic circles because they can find no other place to live. Slums are generally legal, but inadequate multifamily tenements or rooming houses often converted from some other use. Families live crowded in small rooms with inadequate ventilation and sanitation. Often these structures are rickety and unsafe. So shanty towns with shacks built of corrugated metal, discarded packing crates, brush, plastic sheets, and other scavenged materials grow on vacant land in many cities in the developing world. They can house millions of people, but generally lack clean water, sanitation, or safe electrical power. Shantytowns allow squatters to build shelters close to jobs. With little or no public services, shantytowns are often filled with trash and debris. Many governments try to clean out illegal settlements by torching or bulldozing the huts and sending riot police to drive out residents, but people either move back in or relocate to another shantytown. So as we've seen through this module, urban growth is accelerating, especially in developing regions. That brings us to one of the most important questions of our time. How can we live together in cities in ways that are environmentally sound, socially just, and economically sustainable? This is the essence of urban planning. Designing our cities to balance growth with equity, access, and environmental responsibility. Urban planning touches everything: transportation, transportation systems that reduce emissions and connect communities, affordable housing that avoids displacing low-income residents, green infrastructures like parks and wetlands and urban forests, zoning policies that prevent sprawl and protect natural resources, and economic development strategies that create jobs without harming the environment. So, as we move forward, this is your challenge and opportunity. How do we create cities that are not much bigger, not just bigger, but better? Places where people can thrive, not just survive. So, one of the biggest challenges in city development is transportation. Simply put, how do we move people efficiently, affordably, and sustainably within a growing city? Getting people around in a large city is a complex problem that urban planners face daily. And historically, the solution has been automobiles. The development of a freeway made it easier for people to live further out in the suburbs or countryside while still commuting back into the city for work. But this led to a pattern called urban sprawl. When once compact cities begin to spread out across the landscape, sprawl increases the demand for roads, cars, parking, and infrastructure, while also contributing to traffic congestion, air pollution, habitat destruction, and social inequality, as not everyone can afford to live near their job or access reliable transportation. So, transportation isn't just about roads and cars, it's about how we design cities and how we prioritize access, equity, and environmental impacts. The big question is, how can we plan transportation systems that reduce sprawl and pollution while keeping cities connected and inclusive? So, in most American metropolitan areas, the bulk of new housing is in large tract development that leapfrog out beyond the city's edge in a search for inexpensive rural land with few restrictions on land use and building practices. Housing experts claim that overbuilding during the past decades housing bubble left us with 40 million McMansions in drive-only suburbs that no one now wants. So here's another major contributor to urban sprawl, suburban development. So those are large lot neighborhoods filled with wide streets, big homes, and plenty of space, and not much else. At first glance, it might look peaceful and spacious, but let's break it down. These huge houses on sprawling lots come with trade-offs. They consume large amounts of land, often converted from forest or farmland or wildlife habitat. The layout makes it hard to walk or bike, so people become more dependent on cars for everything: work, school, groceries, even getting coffee. Sprawl can also alienate us from our neighbors. There's less natural interaction than in more compact, walkable neighborhoods. And yes, it comes with a lot of lawn mowing, and maintenance, often requiring water, pesticides, and energy. This type of development drives up infrastructure costs like roads and sewer lines, increases carbon emissions, and contributes to social isolation. So while suburban living might feel like a dream for some, it comes with environmental and community costs, especially when the spread is unchecked. The big question is, how can we design better suburbs? Ones that are still comfortable but more sustainable, inclusive, and connected. Would you yeah. So, because many Americans live far from where they work, shop, and recreate, they consider it essential to own a private automobile. The average U.S. driver spends 443 hours per year behind the steering wheel, or the equivalent of one full 8-hour day per week in an automobile. The freeway system was designed to allow drivers to travel at high speeds from source to destination without ever having to stop. So now let's talk about freeways, a symbol of modern mobility, and for many cities, a major challenge. At first glance, freeways seem like a great solution. They offer the illusion of speed and privacy, a fast personal way to get from point A to point B. But in reality, they often do more harm than good, and here's why. Freeways consume massive amounts of land that could be used for housing, green space, or public transportation. They encourage sprawl by making it easier to live farther from the city center. And ironically, they create congestion. As more people move farther out to avoid traffic, they add more cars to the system, making traffic even worse. So people move away from the city to escape the traffic, but end up driving longer distances just to get anywhere. And what's the result? Wasted fuel, lost time, and increased greenhouse gas emissions, plus heavy reliance on cars, limits accessibility for people who can't drive, impacting equity and community connection. So the question becomes, are freeways really freeing us? Or are they locking us into a cycle of dependence, pollution, and isolation? Urban planners today are rethinking transportation, looking at public transit, bike infrastructure, walkability, and mixed use development as smarter, more sustainable alternatives. So many American cities are now restoring light rail systems that were abandoned in the 1950s when freeways were built. Light rail is energy efficient and popular, but it costs up to $100 million per mile or $60 million per kilometer. So we've talked a lot about the challenges of urban sprawl, traffic, and freeway dependence. But what are cities doing about it? So one promising solution is the expansion of light rail and commuter rail systems like Sunrail in Central Florida. And Sunrail began service in 2014 and serves the greater Orlando area, connecting major stops from DeLand in the north to Poinciana in the south. It links Volusia County and Orange counties, moving commuters efficiently through downtown Orlando without relying on cars. Phase 1 covered about 31 miles with 12 stations utilizing existing CSX freight lines, an example of smart reuse of infrastructure. So why is this important? It helps reduce traffic congestion, cuts fuel use and emissions, gives people more transportation options, especially those who don't drive or can't afford a car, and it supports oriented development. Communities built around rail stations that are more walkable and compact. Projects like the Sunrail show that even in car-centric regions, investments in public transit can transform urban mobility and reduce environmental impacts. So as we talk about urban development, we also need to talk about urban decline and what happens when cities lose populations, jobs, and infrastructure over time. So this slide highlights a major challenge and opportunity for cities in the Rust Belt, the heavily industrialized region of the United States that includes much of the Midwest and Great Lakes states. These areas once thrived thanks to manufacturing and steel production, but over the past decades, many factories have closed, leaving behind aging infrastructure, vacant buildings, and struggling communities. Take Detroit, for example. Once home to nearly 2 million people, Detroit's population has dropped to around 700,000 today. That's a massive shift. The city has more than 100,000 abandoned homes and businesses, many of which have already been demolished. So what do we do? There's an opportunity, and some say a necessity, to rebuild and redesign these cities. Revitalize downtowns and neighborhoods, repurpose industrial sites into parks, housing, and innovative hubs, invest in sustainable infrastructure and transit, and prioritize equity and community engagement, especially in historically underserved areas. So this isn't just about economics, it's about restoring dignity and opportunity to places that have been left behind. So many old industrial cities in the Americas, no, in America's Rust Belt are tearing down tens of thousands of abandoned, uh, derelict houses. This opens up an opportunity for redevelopment with gardens, green belts, diverse, flexible housing, walkable neighborhoods, and other features of smart growth. Smart growth aims to provide a mix of land uses to create a variety of affordable housing choices and opportunities. It also attempts to provide a variety of transportation choices, including pedestrian friendly neighborhoods with, yeah. So this approach to planning also speaks to maintaining a unique sense of place by respecting local culture and natural features. By making land use planning open and democratic, smart growth makes urban expansion fair, predictable, and cost effective. All stakeholders are encouraged to participate in creating a vision of the city and to collaborate with rather than confront each other. This walking street in Queenstown, New Zealand, provides opportunities for shopping, dining, and socializing in a pleasant outdoor setting. So there are some design principles of new urbanism, which include limit city size and organize cities in modules of 30,000 to 50,000 people, large enough to be a complete city but small enough to be a community. Maintain green belts in and around cities. So these provide recreational spaces and promote efficient land use as well as help improve air quality, moderate temperature, and reduce water pollution. Determine in advance where development will take place. This protects property values and prevents chaotic development. Planning can also protect historical sites, agricultural resources, and ecological services of wetlands, clean rivers, and groundwater replenishment. Locate everyday um, shopping and services so people can meet daily needs with greater convenience, less stress, less automobile dependency, and less use of time and energy. This might be accomplished by encouraging small scale commercial development in or close to residential areas, encouraging walking or the use of small, low speed, energy efficient vehicles such as microcars, golf carts, bicycles, for many local trips now performed in full-size automobiles create special could help to also solve this problem. So creating special traffic lanes, reducing the number or size of parking spaces, and closing shopping streets to big cars might encourage this alternative. So many cities have large amounts of unused open space that could be used to grow food. Residents often need help decontaminating soil and gaining access to the land. This award winning green roof in Chicago City Hall is functional as well as beautiful. It reduces rain runoff by about 50% and keeps the surface as much as 30 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than a conventional roof or on a hot sunny day. So some more design principles for new urbanism are to promote more diverse, flexible housing as an alternative to conventional detached single-family houses. Infill buildings Infill building between existing houses saves energy, reduces land costs, and might help provide a variety of living arrangements. Allowing single parent families or groups of unrelated adults to share housing and use facilities cooperatively also provides alternatives to those not living in a traditional nuclear family. Make cities more self-sustainable by growing food locally, recycling waste and water, using renewable energy sources, reducing noise and pollution, and creating a cleaner, safer environment. Encourage community gardens, and reclaimed inner city space and greenbelt of agriculture and forest land around the cities provide food and open space, and also contribute valuable ecological services such as purifying air, supplying clean water, and protecting wildlife habitat and recreation land. Equip buildings with green roofs and rooftop gardens that improve air quality, conserve energy, reduce stormwater runoff, reduce noise, and help reduce urban heat island effects. Intensive gardens can include large trees, shrubs, and flowers, and may require regular maintenance. Extensive gardens require less soil and add less weight to the building, and usually have simple plantings of prairie plants or drought resistant species such as sedum that require minimum care. They can last twice as long as conventional roofs. In Europe, more than 1 million um, meters squared of green roofs are installed every year. Urban roofs are also a good place for solar collectors and wind turbines. And another principle is to plan cluster housing or open space zoning, which preserves at least half of the subdivision as natural areas, farmland, and other forms of open space. Studies have shown that people who move to the country don't necessarily want to live miles from their nearest neighbor. What they most desire is long views across interesting landscapes and an opportunity to see wildlife. By carefully clustering houses in smaller lots, and conservation subdivisions can provide the same number of buildable lots as the conventional subdivisions and still preserve 50 to 70% of land as open space. This not only reduces development costs, less distance to build roads, lay telephone lines, sewers, and power cables, and so on, but also helps to foster a greater sense of community among the new residents. And then the last principle is to preserve urban habitat. It can make a significant contribution towards saving biodiversity as well as improving mental health and giving us access to nature. Okay, so here we have Jackson Meadows, which is an award-winning cluster development near Stillwater, Minnesota, where groups of houses add sociable distances and preserve surrounding open spaces for walking, gardening, and scenic views from all homes. So, in conclusion, more than half of us now live in cities, and in a generation, 3/4 of us will live in cities. Shortages of water and housing are urgent problems in fast growing cities of the developing world. Urban planning tries to minimize the strains of urbanization, transportation, which is key to our economy and is a critical part of city planning. And then economic policies are often at the root of the failure of cities.